Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Yes. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much all those who assisted in arranging this event, including the Department of Social Studies of Kyiv Political Institute, the Common Magazine, and Foundation Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And I would like to start my presentation was telling you what we were doing during this year. We were trying to look into the social policy implemented by the incumbent government and its probable alternatives. And I will tell you about the debt policies. And there is a range of my articles dedicated to this topic published in Commons magazine. And why do we call the debt policy of Ukraine as a deterrent for economic development? Well, I can tell you the short story and the current state of debt policy of Ukraine. We can define few stages of Ukraine entering this debt situation we have right now. Let's recollect the year 1991. The 90s were quite difficult for Ukraine. There was quite a lot of turmoil. On the same that took place at the national level as Ukraine started taking loans with the loans which were secured by the state, and the private companies in Ukraine realized that they may use the authorities, they may use the state, and thus they did not pay off their debts, and as a result, the state of Ukraine was in charge of those debts which they could not pay off. They were creating indebtedness for the energy resources, including the energy resources which were delivered from Turkmenistan and Russia. And at the end of the 90s, there was the inflow of loans from the international financial institutions. On the next slide, you can see the loans taken from international organizations. And you can see that starting from 1997, the international financial institutions become the main creditors to Ukraine. What was the policy of the International Monetary Fund? As all over the world, as in Latin America, what Eric was talking about, you can see in the next slide, they want to have a low rate for taking granting us the loan. They also require certain conditions to be met, and this includes the reduction of subsidies for different trade population, privatization, deregulation, the floating currency exchange rate, and liberalization of external trade, and that is all what we call neoliberalization. And as a result, in 1999, we had reserves left to our debts for the International Monetary Fund. So our authorities returned to moderate policy, and in 1999, despite the resistance of cabinet of ministers, the authorities of Ukraine started the process of reconstruction of Ukraine's debt, which was recognized by the international institutions as default of the country. And the creditors allowed us to rearrange the debts, and some debts were abolished by the according to the agreement of the Black Sea Fleet, and that was the debt to Russia. And since 2000, it's the year 2000, there was was the restriction and later on the cancellation of cooperation with IMF, and Ukraine doesn't take loans anymore. And in those conditions, Ukraine was capable to see uh, the improvement of the economy. And we actually wrote in our magazine in comments that it was not true that Ukraine could not obtain new loans. Actually, it was possible at the 6% rate, and large international banks enter the Ukrainian market. So there were credits in the foreign currencies available in Ukraine, especially the mortgages, and that's why the crisis of 2008 affected greatly Ukraine, with a 16% of GDP decrease. Here in yellow, you can see the growth of GDP, and with violet, you can see the correlation between the public debt to GDP. And the next stage is the crisis and renewal of cooperation with international financial institutions. So the debts were accumulating right now. Many international, many Ukrainian forces wanted to offer the loans from international financial organizations, and it is worth mentioning that in 2008 till 2014 was the period when we could have used the funds granted as loans to Ukraine in order to modernize the economy, to improve the industry, and to modernize the equipment. But that was all oriented on export efforts, and the just the crisis was delayed. And in this chart, you can see the balance between the loans taken and then giving them back. So we kept on taking new loans in order to pay off the previous ones, and it evidently it could not lead to prosperity of the country. In 2014, that policy became even worse than it was in 90s, because all the those loans, 17.5 billion hryvnias, were actually granted under very strict conditions. The March memorandum and memorandum of cooperation between the Ukrainian government and IMF provided for great social cuts, and it was and also the reduction of number of employees in educational sector, the increase of retirement age, and some social development could have been used much more efficiently in the economy. And you can see this as a deterrent for economic development of Ukraine. And this is the new chart with the data for 2015. In yellow, you can see the pain of debt, and in red, you can see the loan rate and pain of the interest rate. So this was like this before, and if the tendency continues in future, we will have the same situation as Greece, with 200 billion of loans, and now Ukraine has only 100 billion of loans. And just a few words about interesting events in Ukraine. The whole year of 2015 was dedicated dedicated to negotiations for our international creditors, and where Ukraine was presented as quite a weak state, and actually the reconstruction of that is beneficial to creditors as well, as we have now 75 billion of US dollars in public debts, and we cannot pay it off. And they think that it is better for the patient uh, to be a little bit sick all the time than to for the patient to recover completely. And there was such a statement that it's better one default is actually better. One national bankruptcy is better than 10 reconstructions of that. And Ukraine was was forced to refuse from part of its sovereignty in economic policy uh, in order to have the debt served under the English justice system. And according to the one of the conditions, the 15 million dollars were uh, reconstructed, and if Ukraine shows over 44% growth in the coming years, the 40% of the debts paid off would be given to the international financial institutions, and it means that we are deliberately limiting our economy. So the almost half of the possible profits which could be made by Ukraine would be given to the international financial organizations, which actually created this situation. If we had the financial will, we could have announced the moratorium on paying off the debt, and we could have argued the very legitimacy of these debts, which was also mentioned by Eric Tesson. If the debts could not be paid off, the uh, people should be entitled to revising the debt. And when we talk about capitalist economy, they actually should bear the responsibility for certain risks, for their decisions made. And we also require transparency. The public debt is only the part of this process. Until all the public finances are transparent and are open, until then we cannot say that the people of Ukraine are the actual carriers of power in Ukraine. And if you ask me where do we take the resources from, well, we should find the internal resources, internal funds. And there was the initiative on internal resources over the external one, but the memorandum with the IMF states it quite the opposite, that Ukraine should seek some funds from the international markets instead of its internal market. And the loans which are granted should be used for innovation and research and modernization of economy, and not for paying off the previous debts of, some consumer goods. Well, the national bankruptcy is quite a stressful situation for the economy, and we will require the tools for tax policies and some protection measures, but we are convinced that even such reforming ideas, which I am talking about, even though being revolutionary for Ukraine, are quite possible and are quite doable, because even within this system we can make Ukraine thriving, as we have all the prerequisites to say so. Thank you very much for attention. Thank you, Alexander. Our next
at the first place in Europe, at the last place uh, concerning wages. It's finally the last in the whole region, including Russia, Moldova, because previously Moldova was the first here. It is our record. We also have the second record that, and our government is so proud of it that we are the biggest number one exporter of sunflower oil. So we are the biggest exporter of sunflower oil. And Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, here I wanted to show you a video, but I won't. I even presented some special video for investors that starts with this achievement that Ukraine is will soon become the largest agriculture country in the world. Um, that despite that it used to be agrarian, not really agrarian country. So my speech is dedicated to one topic basically, which is um, showing the lies of the government, which has its general place among the majority of economists that we have high taxes, and if we decrease taxes, it will help economic development of the country. So we specifically, and we all were involved in this, in analyzing the taxes from different sides, and what we could find was that we have very low, even from the tax load on the big business, even informally, but we are at the first place in Europe. We have the lowest tax load on the whole continent on the big business. And this is, for example, official data of the World Bank. I will start here. And you can see what is the level of taxes, what is the tax load on capital, like on big business. And you can see it is lower than anywhere in the world, maybe besides Russia. So if we go to Russia, then maybe we could say something, but still we could say that in Russia there is a big share of state monopolies that export, and there is a different structure there. And I want to offer you to compare with interesting saying from Olena Makeyeva blog, who is deputy finance minister in Ukraine, and she tried to develop philosophy of the tax reform. And on TV, they say it a little bit different, but in the blog for educated people, the saying is that philosophy is the following: implementation of the low tax rates, that punishes a part of population with low income, it brings use to rich people. I missed some part. It says that it should help the economic development. But this economic development never happens, and people consciously lie to us, and they consciously know that the majority of the taxpayers will feel worse. Now, this is our evaluation of the tax load, including shadow sector of economy. According to official evaluation of Ministry of Social Policy and Finance Ministry, in Ukraine, more than 45% of GDP is in the shadow. And after some anti-corruption revolution and increase of the openness in the country after Maidan, we have increase of corruption, which is recognized even by Americans, and we have increased of the shadow sector, which does not pay any taxes at all. And if we consider in the tax load this the weight of this shadow sector, we can see that again we are among the leaders. For us, it will be the lowest, this green color, and we have structure similar to Honduras economy because the weight of the shadow sector comparing to the other sectors of economy in Ukraine is huge. Maybe Honduras is at the first place, we are the next, maybe at the second place. We are not the first here, but we are moving in that direction, in fact. And why is this happening? We prepared some infographics here, and I want you to show this. This infographics from the structure of taxes that Ukrainian budget gets. We see that the first point is agriculture. It creates about 11% of GDP. We'll get back to that. And it pays 0.6% of the taxes. So let's be honest, it's nothing. They don't pay anything. Getting huge income, and we are number one exporter of sunflower oil in the world, it pays nothing to the budget. The next is mining industry. In the mining industry, it's different. They started paying taxes here, but let's keep in mind that the GDP that they calculate here is a GDP that is calculated according to not real prices, because through mechanisms of creation, all the resources that are mined, it is uh, fraudly sold to some Cyprus client, and then it is moved to the world market according to the other price. So real prices, if GDP would be calculated according to real prices, we would have quite different numbers. According to processing industry, and Ukraine pays a little bit here because there is some export and they have VAT compensation. I won't take much time talking about all the small sectors. It's all is on the website. You can read it there. But in general, I want to say that the big business that exports a lot, it basically is liberated from paying taxes. I will have 5 minutes and I will move to the summary. So, the main source of the taxes in Ukraine is actually the citizens. Citizens who pay indirect taxes like VAT on anything that is sold in the country, and citizens who pay income tax. And the first article of the budget income is the taxes like VAT and licenses, and in the local budgets is the income of physical persons is very high. So business gets giant, like huge incomes. They don't pay anything from it. It only decreases the wages to the citizens who are already punished that businesses don't pay them well. They are already also punished with the fact that they still have to pay the taxes, the income tax and indirect taxes. So, as for resources, it is the graph from Alexander's article. We also have it on the website. So it is about sunflower. It's not simple that we are number one because turnover, income is very huge. People get 300 percent growing sunflower. So if we are number one exporter, so the budget could get really huge costs, and it could be fine if we could say that it helps development of the country. But from all the opinions, it is not good for economy. It is one monoculture. It destroys uh, the land, the soil. It also destroys the structure of agriculture because it's not profitable to develop uh, cattle, to grow cattle or other plants. We can just forget about growing cattle. And still, it also restrains or takes away the resources from other sectors of economy. So if we all concentrate on agriculture, it is like oil trap for Saudi Arabia or Russian Federation. All investments get only to agriculture, and also iron ore or and everything else like machine building or anything else is not investment attractive. And the country each year gets more and more into this trap and deindustrialized, and all the infrastructure is destroyed. I hope I still have 2 minutes, and I will move to the summary. I will not focus here on the mining industry. The mining industry and the income are not less. Maybe it's only 200%, not 300% profitability, but the incomes of mining enterprises, they increased after Maidan, and you can see that in the reports of the corporations, and the there is no increase in the taxes from those enterprises. The only summary I have is to start some real economic reforms, real growth, real changes for better in the social sphere. Some future of this country, it starts when oligarchs will finally start paying their taxes. I had the hope that Maidan wanted to make them pay taxes, but let's admit that this point didn't happen. It just failed. So nobody besides some lower class, working class, can do this. And if we don't do this, then our children don't have the future in our country. Just 30 seconds more. There are very concrete measures that have to be made to make this happen. Of course, there has to be political will and political pressure from the lower level. Of course, we need to not to have double taxation from with Cyprus or with offshore zones, to increase taxation of the corporation income, not decrease it but increase. And in order to control that, we need to open accounting of all exporting corporations, and also not only state control but also to have civil control, workers control. And I have responsibility to say that it would not only increase 1.5 or twice to increase the budget, but it could also help not decrease but increase the investments, because the money would not leave the country. This money could be forwarded to investment development of the country. Really, Vitaly, I think that increasing the taxes would increase the investments in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahar. Help us live better. I would like to start from a general outlook from Ukraine's place in the international economy and its place in the international distribution of labor. Which sectors should are better to be used? And the example of agriculture, would try to tell you what should be done in order to use this potential to its full. It is clear that each country in the world uses its advantages in order to improve the standards of living for its population. And it happens so that during the past few years, Ukraine saw some destructive influences in the economy with the war conflict in the east. So we need to search for new niches to move to. And in this slide, I want to show you how the other countries adjust to certain realities and how they try to change their situations. In this slide, you see the countries which consume oil more than other countries in the world. Those are also the countries which are and there are countries which are exporting oil. Uh, so some countries started investing in alternative energy sources, including biofuel and bioethanol, and they try also to reduce their dependency on oil exporters in order not to be the hostages in the situation when the oil exporters dictate their own prices. So they started developing uh, bioethanol sector. So the United States produce 120 million tons of corn, and they use one third of it in order to produce bioethanol in order to substitute oil. And Ukraine consumes 4 million tons of oil per year. In order to substitute it, at least for 30 or 40%, we need to transfer some of our industries to production of bioethanol. This is the place of Ukraine in the national trade, where the sunflower oil Ukraine is number one. And we cannot say that with this everything is good for Ukraine, because for each for some separate crops, Ukraine occupies the highest places on the rankings. But in overall, the export of Ukraine is not that high, because the prices for the products of agriculture in some countries, like for instance Netherlands, are much higher, and we have the capacities and potential, but we need to use it properly. In this slide, you can see the analysis of export and import and the balance, net balance. And the question is whether we use wisely the revenues from selling raw materials, because if we use the revenues to buy expensive cars, this is one thing, and if we invest these funds into the modernization of the equipment, this is the whole other story. And it is worth mentioning that the negative net balance was reduced last year, and this is a positive issue, maybe of the work of a new government or a new Verkhovna Rada, but this is just the fact, and maybe in next year, in next years and years to come, we will see the positive balance for Ukraine, and that will allow us to be less dependent on international financial institutions. And if we have a steady income, we would be able to improve the situation and uh, to overcome the crisis. In the next slides, there are ideas which resemble the ones expressed by Zahar. Well, this is the reason for low efficiency. Well, probably everyone who has the salary of 2,000 hryvnias is searching for some better ways out, and it creates some great gray area of labor which is not taxated, and it is not taxable, and as a result there is no clear fiscal control. So I think that the fiscal policy is the main factor for our future prosperity and our future growth. Unless we are accountable for all our earnings and all our taxes to be paid to the state budget, we cannot see the positive improvements in the country. The reasons for the negative situation in Ukraine is the tax evasion of the companies, then the state, the great burden of taxes for individuals, and the question is why the taxes are so low? Because the agriculture enjoys two tax benefits. The first one is the fixed flat tax rate, which is 0.45% of the normal monetary value of 1 hectare of agricultural land plots. And the second one is that the VAT is used in a special manner for agricultural companies, and the agricultural companies have an opportunity not to pay VAT to the state budget, to the public budget. Only from crop farming, Ukraine could have received 36 billion hryvnias in VAT from agricultural sphere, if the VAT, if such a VAT was charged. This is the same slide. Well, I have been working in agricultural sphere for 8 years already, and I know the revenues of farmers. In past few years, the banking sector is actually hunting down the farmers because they stopped taking loans. So why they do not take loans? Because the interest rates are high, and because they have funds, so they are not short of money. And the farmers have an opportunity to wait for the best prices. That's why they do not need loans from the banks. And the agriculture is the main sector which could be used for the further development. Here you can see the trade of grain crops with the intermediary countries. So all the grain which is sold from Ukraine is traded with intermediary countries, for instance Canada or Switzerland, because the tax rates are low there. So even if you pay only 2% of our revenues, we make our contribution to the budgets of the other countries. And we should also make some restrictions to the trade via offshores. And the list of countries we are trading with is actually different from the end consumers of our agricultural produce, because there are intermediaries used. And then in overall concept is quite simple. This is the change of the system of taxation in agriculture, and also the modernization of equipment, also revival of naval transportation in order to build freight ships, and Ukraine does not actually subsidize the agriculture, but with such a tax benefits, the state is trying to stimulate agriculture. But we do not know whether the actual funds are paid to the employers, to their employees, and actually, those people who work on the farm are very low, paid very little, and there are news that the farmers actually enjoy very expensive cars, but they pay very little to their employees. And I have communicated with many farmers, and I want to say that the high standards of living are of the owners of the farms, as these farmers often pay only 1,000 or 2,000 hryvnias to their employees, while the farmers themselves make millions of hryvnias. Thank you for your attention.
So I'll start from the overview of the situation. I hope all of you saved some money during summer to pay for the bills, because for three-room apartment you'll have to pay about 1,000 hryvnia, including subsidies, and according to the without subsidies it should be about 2,000 hryvnia. You know that the price for oil is decreased, and the gas, and but the price should be about $400, and then the price will increase even more for the population, considering that we only have average salary of 4,000 hryvnia. So this bringing the prices towards market prices will lead that it will be impossible to pay the bills. Maybe you'll have the question whether the increased tariffs go to modernization of the energetic sphere. Here you have one of the coal heating power station in Ukraine. There was no modernization. The average age of the heating power station is about 50 years, and not a single other station was built. And this is the average effectiveness of the CHP. It is about 30%. You know, the specialists know what that means comparing to Europe. This graph shows the average effectiveness of the coal stations in EU. It is 38%, and the most new stations have 45%. This is the data for the coal stations. And in Europe, there are many paragas equipments, and for Ukraine, the effectiveness of those stations is about 60%. You can compare it to 30% effectiveness of the coal stations in Ukraine. From this short overview, we can have a sad summary that moving towards the market privatization in Ukraine, It didn't allow what the propagandists advertised, the decrease of the prices and increase of effectiveness and modernization. But it doesn't only happen in Ukraine. The energetic crisis after moving to the market, this is a demonstration of the gas contract, signing the gas contract between Putin and Timoshenko, and the current visit of the Chinese president in October to UK, where the long expected contract was signed for 17 billion of pounds to build a new station. It happened in UK. Traditionally, very liberal countries, they had to sign the contract with state company from the communist China and with a state company in France. We can also add other crisis events in other countries. You know, the Bulgaria, the government was ousted after the crisis in electricity. In Moldova and Armenia, there was also political crisis connected to the tariffs for energy. Now we'll move to the suggested methods to how to get out of the crisis. Vladimir Ishchenko, in his introduction, he mentioned that when reform doesn't work, we are suggested or offered to have even more reforms. I have a very interesting document from 2012, still of our previous president. It was called National Action Plan on the right hand side, and on the left hand side it is of our current president. It's called Development Strategy of Ukraine till 2020. I can offer you the game how to find 10 differences. I can say that diversification was not directly mentioned in Yanukovych's plan, but please note that reverse gas supply started before 2013. It's not just slogans. The documents on presidents' websites. We really have privatization and changing of the ownership. In the heating energy sector, only 40% belongs to the government. If we offer a new privatization plan and it will be completed, it will be 0%. Now it's interesting how ideologic rhetoric justifies the situation in the energy sector. This is an article from a famous daily newspaper in Ukraine, Mirror Weekly. It says that we can decrease financing of the aggressor and have more jobs. And this means that market is considered like a miracle abilities. And this is the economist's view. This helps to understand more about the market. Here's a typical argument about bigger effectiveness of the market price. You can see where the lines cross. It is the most effective price, and you can see the colored point here, and it says that this square is maximized when we have the market price. I'll get back to that graph later. On the international level, this policy is also supported. As you know, Ukraine is a part of energy community, and it has the obligations to move to the free market of gas and electricity. On this slide, we can show the celebration of the director of energy community about the new law on gas in Ukraine, and he says that Ukraine will finally get the fruits from the free market of free gas market. We see the fruits, and we'll see more fruits in the winter. All of that are beautiful words, announcement words of director, but that was not what the real life is when you pay the bills. And when you show the differences, they say, as they talk about Soviet past, and they say we need to move to the market, and they show us the West. But in the West, this did not really work in the energy sector. This is the stages of liberalization in different states. The red is where liberalization is still happening, the gray is where it was stopped, and white is where it never started. You see, in the majority of the states, liberalization either did not start or it was stopped. Why was it stopped? Take a look at California, it's the west coast. In 2001, after the start of liberalization of the energy sector, the prices were increased 13 times, and it was emergency situation announced. In the center of the crisis, there was Enron company with a huge turnover of $100 million. It is like Gazprom, and it was considered the most innovative, but then it just fell apart as a house of cards. And this hidden fraud in the electricity and reports was found. Maybe it happens only in the US. Let's see what happens in the European countries. I won't bore you with the details, but England was one of the first countries that implemented the free market in the energy sector. Now it's the leader of stopping the liberalization. You could see the contract, they have increased of the prices, so it's central planning. It goes to the central bank. France never moved there. State still controls the energy sector. Poland tried to play with privatization. Now the state has a control share in all the energy companies. Russia had an interesting case. They had the biggest in the history privatization, liberalization of the energy, electricity. But when Chubai, the great reformer, understood that it doesn't work, he tried to use market approach and make investors and new owners to build new stations. So the market didn't work there. Norway, Finland, and Hungary, the main companies are controlled by the state. The next thing we have is more scientific. We had general remarks before. If we talk about some economic articles where academicians have more detailed analysis of the consequences of the liberalization, and three articles from different three countries, it says that liberalization uh, caused the increase in prices. It's very strange that, taking all of that into consideration, in Ukraine we still have the dogma about liberalization necessary, considering what happened in the Western countries. It's a very strange situation. Now, returning to this graph, the theoretical backgrounds, the basics of the failure of liberalization. What lies behind that? Market price is bigger than the real price. The cost of the producing electricity, if we count the average price, it can it can cover all the expenditures, but propagandists say that it should be higher. The second discrepancy is that they say the common welfare is increased, maximized when we have this price, but the owners don't bring this welfare to millions of consumers. If the manufacturer gets 1 million, and according to the theory, it has the same value for the society like 10,000 consumers saving $100 or €100. So the welfare of one person is equals to the welfare of 10,000. The third point also concerns consumers. The big, rich consumers can save some money on some price, and it means more than 1,000 of poor consumers saving less money. The alternatives. 1 minute more. The effective alternatives to liberalization, they exist. We can see them even now in the dominating liberal policy in the economy. From my experience in different projects, I can say that in Europe we have such a tendency when a state enters with a controlling share, the energy companies, but they also have people with experience in the private companies. They pay them big salaries, so there is a balance here when they spend hundreds of thousands to the salaries of managers, but they save millions for decreasing prices in the energy sector. But in Ukraine, even moving to that step, we need some kind of balance in the power between the left and the right, and this is what we don't have. We have domination of the right forces. If we would have the balance, then under the pressure of the left forces, we could create the development banks that could finance and invest different spheres of the economy. If we would have the pressure of the left forces, we could enter with the controlling shares, the energy companies or other big companies, and invest on their into different spheres of economy. Until the left forces can say that 1 million for a common person doesn't for a million for big businesses doesn't mean as much as for 10,000 common people. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying with us and interested with other presentations. I would be talking about the forces coming from the social civil society and coming from the citizens in order to influence the decisions which could be made in the country. And we from in our Center for Social and Labor Research have been monitoring the protests in Ukraine, and we have very many statistic data about what's going on in the streets of our country. These data are based on daily monitoring of 100, approximately 100 websites, those which post news, and also social websites and websites of NGOs. Here you can see the social economic protests from 2011 till 2015, and you can see social protests in red and economic in green. And these, not all the data for 2015 have been processed, but the data we have show us the state of affairs, and that's why I decided to include them to this presentation. As we can see from this slide, the overall tendency was that Ukraine had seen the climax of social and economic protests, and I'm sure you are aware of that. From 2000 from 2013 to 2014, all the social and economic processes were in the best interest of the different strata of population, and the 76% of the protests held in March 2011 were related to social and economic issues. I will come back to that period because that was the period when, led by the trade unions, the workers of the education sector required 20% salary increase. Those including teachers and other employers of the educational institutions. And I know that it was a successful protest, as the salary increase was granted to them, but it was cancelled after all after a few years. It is worth while dividing this time frame into two parts, before Maidan and after Maidan, because if we have a look before Maidan, the social and economic issues were raised in every other protest held in Ukraine. Apart from that, before Maidan, we saw the increase of the number of protests compared to other type of protests. Based on these data, we can say that the biggest part of the mobilization which took place before Maidan against government, against authorities, was based by social dissatisfaction with the social and economic development of Ukraine, because the social and economic protests kept on accumulating until October 2013, and then we had the record, as there were 238 protests held in October 2013. Of course, after the Maidan, the number of social and economic protests in absolute figures, and I'll show you the next slide. This is the percentage of the protests, of all protests, and you see that during the Maidan this percentage plummets, and it is worth saying that it was quite low uh, until till October 2015, uh, and there were only 19% of social and economic protests, and this is quite. These figures are quite low compared to the time before Maidan. But I want to stress here that such a reduction, which actually stopped because starting from the end of 2014, the share of social and economic protests is increasing. While such a reduction was only in absolute figures, was only in the percentage. In the speaking in absolute figures, such reduction was only a short term, and in general, the social and economic protests continued in the same numbers, and they even and the frequency even increased compared to 2012. When we talk about the end of 2014, while in December, the end of 2014, there was a new record held, uh, as there were 358 protests held, which is 100 protests more than the previous record. So we can say that there was the mobilization for the civil rights, and that's why the social and economic processes didn't come to the fore, but they didn't vanish at all. And actually now their number is the same as it used to be before Maidan. And now we can say that in April, in the period from April to August 2015, those are the protests of social and economic issues. The main topics which bring people to the streets in terms of social and economic protests, those are the illegal construction. The second one is the quality or the amount of utility services tariffs. Then the rights for a small business, the social benefits. Then goes the indebtedness or delays with salaries, environmental issues, and land issues. Uh, and the and one of the Apart from the issues enumerated, another topic for social and economic protests in August 2015 was also the military issues and uh, procurement for the army. This is the participation of parties and politicians, and I want to tell you who makes it to the streets with social and economic protests and demands. These are different figures, and they show the share of social and economic protests, how in which the parties participate, and in the second column, the third column is in the general percentage of the parties and politician participation in the protests. So the social and economic protests are of less interest to the parties and politicians in Ukraine. And we may see from these figures that the participation from parties, the participation of parties after Maidan substantially reduced and continues to decline. Eh, eh, and it shows that, well, at least my interpretation of these facts is that we do not have the parties which are in opposition right now, and those opposing parties which would come up to the streets and criticize the authorities, because the parties which are in power right now, they were in opposition under the Yanukovych period, so they participated in the social economic protests back then. But with the change of power, these people came to power, uh, and they do not largely participate in the protests. Apart from Svoboda, the Freedom Party, which is not well represented which is not represented in the Parliament of Ukraine. So we do not have the opposing parties. We do not have the opposition right now, and it means that some political forces which were unfavorable to many people, they vanished. But on the other hand, the opposing voices in parliament and in the streets as well, it is absent. Well, the participation of trade unions in social and economic protests. Well, here we can see what happened during these years. The climax of trade unions participation is 2011. This is the same protest I told you about, the protest of educators, and this shows us that the trade unions are actually capable of protests, and I'm talking about the official trade union of Ukraine, and their participation, even in social and economic protests, is very low. And after Maidan, the trade unions do not participate much in the protests. And we can also say that the vast majority of the social protests take place without the participation of political parties or organizations, and we see that in 2011 there were only 44% of such social economic protests, and that mostly included the protests of educators and also people uh, who were in Chernobyl and who went to Afghanistan. And now their protests take up and now the protests are mostly represented by, for instance, the dwellers of the same house, or of the students, or small and medium enterprises representatives. We see that in terms of violence, the protests are not violent, and we see that in general, and the protests are not violent in Ukraine. Apart from the figures for 2014, which means Maidan, and uh, the political approach to social and economic protests results in the change of the number of protests, and the social and economic protests are led by the issues which are of relevance to the community, and they show what part of social and economic processes are actually capable to show the actual change, and we see that the share of such protests is not very high. And if we have a look at this, more than 20% of politicization took place during the protests of educators, subsidized people who have social benefits, and after Maidan. And almost all social and economic protests included the issues of also included the issues of removal of corrupt officials. And in order to conclude, I would like to say that although the number of social and economic processes declined after Maidan, they are still of relevance, and now we see some increase in in the number of such protests. And the majority and the biggest part of these protests uh, uh, are localized, and they pertain to the issues which are of concern to the citizens of certain streets or certain apartment blocks, and sometimes they even are transferred to the level of the city, or and well, actually, uh, sometimes they do not even have the general agenda. For instance, the agenda uh, for influence of the citizens on forming the tariffs for utility services. They do not have actual agenda, so people just come to the responsible authorities and to have a protest. And there are no organizations, there are no NGOs, nor trade unions which would be interested in organizing such protests. Given the political situation that vacuum and that absence of opposition which exists in our country, uh, and even in that case, we can say that the lack of the opposition could be used as a potential for people to organize themselves and to protect their social and economic rights. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Oksana. Now, before we have the 15 question and answer session, and we have a non-planned presentation, as one of our participants would be late for a train. So would you introduce yourself and present your findings?
Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. It was really my presentation. I work in the employment service in Khmelnytsk region. So I was invited to this meeting. So what issue I wanted to tell you? This is the issue that we see every day, and we want to talk about it on our conference. And it's an issue on the taxes. It was mentioned here correctly. I agree completely about taxation of the agriculture and big business, but as for taxation of the employees, we cannot agree to the fact that the taxes should be increased. What we see every day, and especially those who work with the private sector, the economy is being shadowed a lot, and the main employment place for a person is usually shadow employment. It is connected to the fact that the employers do not want to pay taxes for the salaries. It's more than 50% is taxes what the employer pays and employee pays. What if we also take indirect taxes, what we pay in the shops, then we'll have about up to 70% of direct or indirect fund of the salaries. Of course, we can place near each employer in the theory controllers that he will check whether the person is employed officially or unofficially. There are some fees to punish those who do it illegally, but of course we cannot place controller near each employer, and so the state should stimulate the legal employment because if we will look at that in the future, then it will be a disaster because in the medicine, in education, a lot of will go into the shadow. This is what we also already see at the local, at the regional level. Unofficial education, unofficial years of employment, because there is no sense. People don't believe the state protection in the small retirement, and it all places the consequences of the employment system, and the process only gets worse. Please understand me correctly. The system of taxation and of the employment, it cannot be solved on the local level. Up to 70% taxation of the employment fund. We need to decrease the taxation here to stimulate employer and employee to legal employment. The rest is just stimulating measures. So it will just not work if we don't have the primary stimulus for the employer and employee. The rest will just not help. And the same goes for taxation of the income of the people and the taxation of the salary fund. We need to have state policy for decrease of the taxes, and then the employers will be interested in this. Just 30 seconds more. And really, we can create the mechanism of the control with the fees, with the punishing system. And employers say, you just disturb us from working. But we can do this, but we cannot place controller near each employer. So, really, the civil initiatives, civil organizations working with the state, with the government, they need to make correct taxation for the salary fund. If you take a look how many taxes you pay, it's up to 40% that your employer pays. So we need to place the question about decreasing the load on the employment of the salary fund, and then it will be stimulus appearing for the employers and the employees. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interesting intervention. Now we'll have 15 minutes for the questions if you have. I'm dealing on the consulting business and economy marking. I take a look at those issues And as an economy specialist or expert, I have the first question. I can tell you how all the solutions are being made in the issues that were discussed. I would like to ask you, Oksana, up to 2013, when we had this decrease, do you think it was just a decrease of the selling protests, of the purchasing protests? It was just purchased protests. We don't know what is the party is just sofa party. Do you think your analysis, like we really had good protests, and then they disappeared, and then we already have this purchased protests? Like I think Leshko is a protest that was just bought. This is actors. This is a game of playing opposition game. Don't you think it just you just follow as a speaker those bourgeois players that just play the game? Please be more laconic, please. The question is 50% of electricity concerning to the events in the east are being produced by the nuclear stations. There were some protests about that we need make to privatize the nuclear energy because the state nuclear stations they constrain the increase of the price. It means that so many percentage of the electricity that being produced on the CHP, then it was increased due to privatization, and it's also concerning that the energy ministry also owns about 10% in the energy sector enterprises. So how can you how can you explain the actions of this foolish Minister of Energy? Is it privatization or is this to please some international organizations? And in the same context, I have the question to our speaker, to Mr. Kravchuk. I cannot understand how can you explain this anti-national, anti-sovereign policy of the government, of the anti-people's front with very low ratings and support in the population. Why do they do this? Thank you. I'm from rights activist group. The question towards Kravchuk. You mentioned priority of the internal resources. What are the